So I want to talk today about payment channels that happen over blockchains. I'll give a little bit of background. The basic idea is that underneath we have a blockchain like the one running Bitcoin or Ethereum, cryptocurrencies, but the capacity is not enough. And so using trusted execution environment, which I'll also describe, we're able to do high capacity transactions with low latency. And the novelty, a particular novelty of this work is that we're also going to be able to do it asynchronously off the blockchain. This is joint work with Emin Gunsir from Cornell, Oded Naor, my student from the Technion, and Josh Lind, Florian Kelbert, and Peter Pitzuk from Imperial College London. So we're in the world of blockchains, and we're implementing a currency. We have Alice and Bob and Carol over there at the bottom, and they're communicating with a peer-to-peer network that operates the so-called blockchain. And the goal of the blockchain is to allow Alice to pay Bob. This is Alice paying from her address A1 to Bob's address B1. And then Bob is able to pay Carol with a blue payment from B1 to C1. And the nodes together achieve a serial order on these transactions so that if Alice tries to make another payment and conflicts with her previous payments, she's not able to do this because we have on the right there serialization of all transactions. There's a clear order of what happens after what. I'm not going to talk about blockchains though. I'm just going to say that there is a scaling issue. So we have at the central this blockchain, block data structures containing the transactions. And the nodes achieve an order of these blocks that implies the order of the transactions. And all the users are sending transactions to the system, and these are placed in the blocks. But really, there are a lot of users. And with the growing popularity of these systems, there are really a lot of users. And these systems reach a point where the blockchain itself just can't take all this capacity. There are two separate concerns. One is throughput, which is limited, and one is latency. It takes a long time until the block is confirmed. It is possible to improve things a little bit using by tweaking the parameters of the underlying blockchain protocol, and it is possible to go a long way forward using advanced blockchains. We've done some work about that, and I'm not going to talk about that at all. Even with all of these, you still have an inherent limit. This is a choke point, a bottleneck. What we would have wanted to have is the peers connecting directly to one another. To achieve that, we have two challenges. These are the challenges that the blockchain solved. One is payment cancellation. We need Alice not to be able to tell Bob, oh no, I actually didn't pay you after the fact. And we need to prevent double spending when Alice tells Bob, here is a coin, and then she goes and tells Carol, here is the same coin. And this is a little difficult to achieve when Bob and Carol don't know of one another. So Alice could do this with a lot of friends. So, quite a while back, David Chung addressed this problem in a way using a central bank as a trusted entity. The idea there was to have the bank sign a coin, like a check, but do this in a blinded manner, so that Alice went to the bank, gave some piece of a non-secret piece of information. The bank signs this, provides a signature of that piece of information, hands it back to Alice, and then Alice goes and gives the secret information signed by the bank to Bob. And when Bob goes back to the bank can recognize its signature, but it cannot connect this to the signature it sent Alice earlier. So in a way, this overcomes the offline payment. The goal, as you understand, is privacy rather than performance, but it did go a long way there. Only preventing double spending, for example, was only taken care after the fact. So the bank was able to tell if both Bob and Carol came with the same signature that was given to Alice. And it's fine for the bank, because the bank knows where Alice lives, and it has the police go to her door. We want this to be enforced by the system. Now, if we're using a blockchain, we can't do that. The blockchain doesn't know anything. It's run by a peer-to-peer network, right? So the solution that's generally, the general approach in the blockchain system is to use payment channels. Here you overcome the double spending problem by just having two parties. So there's no third party. And payment cancellation is overcome with crypto. Alice signs with a private key that only she has. And now we have everything enforced by the blockchain. So let's look at a simple example of how this works. The basic idea is that every party places a deposit on the blockchain, and this is used in case of someone trying to cheat. They lose the collateral they placed on the blockchain. Payments are made by direct communication, Alice, Bob. Nothing goes to the blockchain while they're doing the payments. And the key guarantees that each of them can independently say, okay, I'm done, go back to the blockchain and receive the fair balance of what it should get. So if the other party is dead or malicious or just asleep, one can go and take its money. No more, no less. Let's look at an example. So the blockchain for us now is just this log. It's sometimes referred to as ledger. This log where you place transaction. Once they're placed, they're placed. We're not going to look, if you're familiar with the technology, we're not going to look at situations where there is a reorganization and something is rolled back. So we're waiting enough for the transaction to be final. So initially what Alice does is the following. She places a setup transaction on the blockchain. And this transaction has an output that requires, so this is an input where Alice, I'm supposed to stand here, right? This is an input where Alice paid into this transaction. And this is an output that requires two signatures in order to spend this transaction. So whoever wants to spend this transaction needs to sign with two separate keys, and this is what happens here. Alice holds this refund transaction. The refund transaction takes all the money, let's say the collateral is $100, it takes all the $100 and send them back to Alice. Only it's time locked. Let's say a week from now, Alice cannot use this transaction and place it in the blockchain until 1 week has passed. This is the setup. Now Alice wants to pay $3 to Bob. Alice generates a transaction, a payment transaction, that pays $97 back to herself and $3 to Bob. But here we need two signatures, right? Not one. And Alice can only produce one signature. So this is the information that she sends to Bob. And once Bob receives this transaction, he can choose to take it and place it on the blockchain, adding his own signature, which only he can do, and then get his $3. But let's say we're still keeping the channel open, so Alice now wants to pay $2 more to Bob. She produces a new transaction, again with only her signature, paying $95 back to herself, and now $5 to Bob. Now note that Bob can go and spend this and get the $5, but Alice cannot use the old transaction because she doesn't have Bob's signature, and Bob will not use his old transaction because he can get more. And so we enforce the actual payment. Once Bob receives this message, the money is as good as moved. So each party can settle, but no one can roll back. So now we want a two-sided channel. And this is where things get complicated. This is what we want. We can simply have two unidirectional channels. That's going to work. But once one channel is depleted, one side is depleted, they're done. They have to shut down the channel on the blockchain and open a new channel. In this situation, both of them have a deposit of $100. Alice depleted her channel, but Bob paid $50 back. Nonetheless, Alice cannot send anything else to Bob unless she closes down this channel, then forms a new collateral, etc. So I'll mention two solutions to this issue of how to form two-sided channels. One is from Decker and Wattenhofer. I'm not going to go through the details. The intuition is that they actually do form two individual channels, but these channels rely on a set of previous transactions structured as a tree. Once one pair of channels is depleted, so one of the sides is depleted, they can reset without touching the blockchain. They can reset and switch to a new branch of this tree. And so they're able to use the new channels, the reset channels, until they're depleted and so on and so forth, until the tree is done. When both sides agree, they can place a single transaction in the blockchain, they're done. When they're not, they need to place a transaction, so the depth of the 3 plus 2 total transactions on the blockchain. So it's quite efficient, but it is time limited, it's time bounded. They have a timeout on all the channels. The refund transaction is locked, and they have to terminate the channels before reaching this time. And the amount to transact in each direction is actually bounded. So it's the amount per channel times the number of possible resets, that's it. Another approach, not simpler, is called the Lightning Network. Poon and Rija came up with it a while back. The latest version of their paper I've seen is 2016. It's now being developed by at least 3 separate entities. One of them is MIT's DCI. Another is a company, which doesn't matter. The idea is a little bit different here. The 2 parties agree at all times on the state of the channel. So who should get what? And a payment here is a capability to close the channel at the current state, so form the transaction that gives each party whatever it should, but also a capability to kill a transaction on the blockchain that tries to resurrect an old wrong state. So if Bob goes and tries to shut the channel at a situation that is no longer valid, so getting more than he should deserve, Alice is able to put another transaction, her own transaction, in the blockchain that is going to penalize Bob with his collateral. So it's a little bit complicated. That's something of an issue. On performance, they require 1.5 round trip times per payment. This takes a while because of the back and forth in contrast to the payment channel approach. And the processing has to be sequential, so they have to do the transactions one at a time. They are doing batching, so they're kind of hiding this limitation, but a single transaction happens one at a time. And finally, like before, the parties have to monitor the blockchain. They have to have continuous access to the blockchain, and if Alice sees that Bob is putting something on the blockchain, she has to react. So if he's trying to spend the channel at an old state, she needs to see that and discard his transaction. So this is what we're trying to overcome here, the tension between these 2 goals. So each party should be able to settle the channel. That means that the party has the capability, in practical terms, it's able to form a transaction to place on the blockchain to get the money now. But then 1 hour from now, after the state has changed, the party should not be able to use this transaction. And so our solution uses trusted execution environment, concretely Intel's SGX. I'll tell you a little bit about SGX so that we're all on the same page, and then tell you about the single channel operation of the channel, and how we form chains of channels, so transacting from Alice to Bob to Carol to Dave without touching the blockchain. SGX, yeah?
Does it have the power to punish Bob if Bob does like a valid transaction and he doesn't ask more than what he should?
No. If Bob is doing what, so you're talking about this solution? No, so the payment is done. So if I'm paying you, I'm providing you with 2 capabilities. One capability to terminate the channel with the current state, and the second capability is to abort transactions, to abort in case I try to place an old transaction. This means you have to keep track of all the previous states, so that if I try to terminate the channel at any of them, you have the corresponding secret that is necessary to abort. That's the reason for that. So SGX. SGX is a particular implementation of the trusted execution environment idea from Intel. This is your stack of your computer. You have some code that you're trusting and Intel's trusted processor at the bottom. And the trusted processor ensures confidentiality. So even the user of the machine is not able to see what's going on inside the processor. And this includes a secure random number generator. So the processor is able to generate a secret that the owner of the computer cannot access. Integrity, meaning that the user cannot affect the execution with or without understanding what's going on. And finally, remote attestation, where Alice is able to prove to Bob that she has done what she says she's done. I'll spend 2 more seconds on that. I want to emphasize here, you only need to trust the top and the bottom here. So the machine can run any untrusted application code outside the one you're trusting. The operating system isn't trusted, the hypervisor isn't trusted, nothing. The hardware isn't trusted, not the channels, not the memory, not nothing. Everything is encrypted before leaving the processor. Now the attestation works as follows. Alice needs to prove to Bob that she's running what she says she's running. So she's producing a data structure called an attestation that has the output of the execution. It has a fingerprint of the code. This is a fingerprint that Bob knows. So Bob can calculate the fingerprint of the code that he trusts. And finally, a signature generated by a signature where Intel has the secret key. Actually, not even Intel, your own CPU. And the signature proves or attests to the fact that this was all done inside an Intel's secured CPU. So here's the crux of the protocol. Now we're getting to the point. The trusted execution environments of Alice and Bob share a secret key. They have secret keys that only they know, and Alice and Bob don't. And then the trusted execution environments produce the capabilities, the transactions to place on the blockchain. So Alice cannot generate it by herself. She needs to ask her trusted execution environment, but once the trusted execution environment generates this transaction, it terminates. So it won't produce another one. So Alice can only produce the state at the current point in time, not an earlier one. So I'm going to address 2 straw men that practically always come up. One is, seriously, do you trust Intel? This is about cryptocurrencies. Trust no one, right? And the answer is in 2 parts. First, only Alice and Bob needs to trust Intel, not the rest of the cryptocurrency. So if you're using Bitcoin, you don't need to go and ask libertarians to trust the evil corporate. You just need to trust the other side. If both of you trust that Intel is working okay, then it's fine and nobody else cares. Second, Intel is probably reliable enough for your micropayments. The worst conceivable case is that Intel decides to stop operating its services, and then it's a denial of service attack. So you can't create new channels. Existing channels still work. No money is stolen. Intel doesn't have access to anything, but you will not be able to start new channels. I can talk in detail offline if someone is interested on how it works. There's a lot that has to go wrong inside Intel in secret for it to be able to actually access secret keys generated inside the CPU. Another question that usually comes up is, isn't this just handing the problem to a trusted entity? So we have a trusted entity and we let it do everything, we're done. Why do we even need a blockchain? And the thing is that doesn't really work like that. The trusted execution environment doesn't have access to the outside world. It doesn't even have access to its memory, right? It's all controlled by the operator. And so its operator, Carol, here, could be malicious. And so if Alice and Bob's money is held by a private key that is maintained in Carol's control, then she can just terminate, or whatever its TE from accessing the world, and then Alice and Bob are locked or subject to ransom attack. So it's not the same. How it operates. Alice and Bob form a private channel between their trusted execution environments. They're using the attestations to make each of them uses the attestation from the other side to make sure that its own trusted execution environment is indeed communicating with the trusted execution environment on the other side. So it's not going to deliver secrets in the open to Bob. Yeah.
So when you said one trusted execution environment can lock both parties out of their contract,
Yeah.
that also appears to be the case if Intel is malicious, right? So if Intel has some way of sending a signal to all of their trusted execution environments at one point in time, and they all stop working.
Intel doesn't, I mean, maybe with secret antennas and something like that in Intel CPUs, that's, I think.
It's also possible to
so the trusted execution environments don't have direct access to the internet. They only get the information that Alice explicitly sends to them.
Okay, let me be a little bit more evil. Suppose Intel decides...
That was quite evil already.
Everything stops working just because we feel like it.
Yeah.
So does this lock everyone out of existing contracts at that point in time?
So there is self-disintegration mode in the CPU, and suddenly I get a little bit of smoke coming out of my CD-ROM, and yeah, that would be an issue. Okay. To be more realistic, the way Intel, 30 seconds, the way the attestations work right now is that if you want to validate an attestation, you have to send the attestation to Intel. The way we use them, there is no useful information in them. It's just hashed. So Intel cannot learn anything about secrets or even public information from its attestation verification. But if it stops operating its attestation verification services, the Intel attestation service, IAS servers, then you cannot bootstrap a new channel. But once we bootstrap the channel, each side generates an internal secret, so we don't routinely access Intel in order to run the channel, just on bootstrapping. So now we have the secret channel. Now Alice sends money, this is how we operate. But before we even do that, Alice sends money to a trusted execution environment, to an SGX address, an address locked within her SGX. So she puts in 3 deposits. This is before even talking to Bob. Now she talks with Bob, and she tells him, look, this is the deposit A3 here. This is an SGX secure deposit. Let's associate it to secure our channel. This is going to be my collateral. Now, Bob has to go down to the blockchain, check that this transaction really is in there. No SGX can do that, not Alice's, not Bob's, because they don't have connection. So this can be done in plain view. This is no secret there. And only then does Bob tell its SGX, look, this deposit is indeed associated with this channel. It's a real deposit on the blockchain, I checked. And it's Bob's responsibility, and it's fine because it's Bob's money at stake. So we're able to place the deposits beforehand, form the channel, and then do the association. And now we have the channels, and Alice is able to pay Bob. Now, to pay Bob, Alice just has to let Bob know, my TEE, my SGX, is updated with the new balance. Once the SGX produces this confirmation, Bob knows that it will not produce a transaction that pays Alice more than its current balance. The SGX is committing not to go back in time. Now there's a magic we can do here. We can actually remove a deposit from the channel if we don't need it. So let's say now it's Bob that owes Alice some amount. So Alice doesn't actually need her collateral, or more accurately, Bob doesn't need Alice's collateral. Alice can ask Bob, hey, we don't actually need this deposit. Can I detach it, disassociate it from our channel? And once Bob confirms, the deposit becomes free again, and so Alice can use it towards another channel in her control. So we don't even need to go back to the blockchain every time we terminate a channel. So the nice thing, one of the nice points here is that after all deposits are on the blockchain, you can make the payments without touching it. So the parties in particular don't even need to monitor the blockchain because they get the commitments from the other side. They can't keep getting payments while the channel is already closed, because the trusted execution environment on the other side won't allow it. Here's an illustration. We have Alice and Bob somewhere where there's perfect connection. They're putting their deposits on the blockchain, and they're both downloading the blockchain, so they're up to date. They have knowledge of the other side's commitments. Now they go to this deserted island with no internet. They meet, they form the channel, they make high-frequency payments, and then once one of them goes back to internet, they're able to place the transaction on the blockchain and terminate it at the fair balance. And a more relevant situation is, of course, if you're on a plane with no connection or something like that. And the nicest thing is that you can make the first payment without touching the blockchain. That's instant. For Bitcoin, for example, you'd need 10 minutes just to start. We don't have time for both. There are two options. Either I talk about persistence in case of failures, or about our performance results. Raise your hand if you want to talk about you want to hear about performance. Okay, so most of you want to hear about resilience. So let me tell you, we have two different approaches. One is for you, if you want to do transactions among one another. And another is for large, let's say, banks or exchanges that want to do high-frequency exchanges, high-frequency payments between one another. So this is the persistent storage solution. If you just store the solution from the SGX, the current state of the SGX, to disk, and your enclave, your secured environment, allows you to load it, then there's a trivial attack where Alice stores her state, keeps transacting, loads an old state, and terminates her channel with the old state from the SGX. So what we're doing to overcome this replay attack is use the monotonic counters. There's a lot to say about the mechanics of how these are implemented, but what's important for us is that there can only be incremented, and they're very slow. So what we do is whenever we want to back up our state, we store it to disk while incrementing the counter by 1. When we load it from disk, we compare the counter stored to disk with the current counter. If there's a mismatch, we don't allow to load. Only it's very slow, so we can only do 10 backups per second. So if you're buying coffee, sure, that's going to work. If you are interested in more than 10 transactions per second, you'll need something larger. So here, I'm actually not going to make it for the chain part of the talk, but this is another kind of chains we're using, which is chains for replication and storage of state. So we're using 3 separate SGXs. The command that comes in, instead of just one SGX, the command comes into the first SGX, which together with the attestations sends it to the next one, and the last one sends out the output. Now, they all keep the state. So if one of them crashes, either of the others can load the state and terminate the channel. But once this happens, of course, you cannot continue. You have to form a new chain. This is intuitively, this is fairly straightforward. The only practical catch is that, of course, it requires much more resources. So if you keep the 3 copies on 3 machines of the same brand in the same rack, you're not achieving much. You actually need to have some sort of geo-replication and different failure modes. And so this is only for cases where the user has enough resources to achieve that. I will skip the chain discussion and conclude. So I showed you how to create fast payment channels using SGX on top of a blockchain with high throughput and low latency and instant or offline access to the blockchain. Thank you very much.
This sounds like about fast enough to like enable a data economy, right? Which is kind of a big target for blockchains, right? So that someone can pay you like a cent for a megabyte of content. So is that indeed fast enough?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're only bounded by the network properties of your communication with your peer and the collateral. Sorry?
Is anyone working on that?
So this is fairly new, but there are some companies that are developing cryptographic channels. They require online access to the or synchronous access to the blockchain, but the goal is the same. Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, and thank you to all.
Thank you very much.